Welcome back to the Frontier Travelers. Pull up a chair and turn up the volume because today's journey will take us to the far reaches of the galaxy, where love is rare and danger is constant. If you appreciate good stories and the old code of honor, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. The Betsy was dying. It wasn't a noble death, not the glorious, silent explosion against a star-dusted backdrop that the holovids promised. This was a death of inches, a slow, pathetic bleed-out in the godless black of the Cygnus Rift. The cockpit was a shrine to failure, bathed in the frantic, pulsing red of a dozen warning lights. The deep, soul-satisfying thrum of the ion engines, a sound that had been the background music to Rusty Vance's life for years, had deteriorated into a rattling, metallic cough, a death rattle echoing through the worn deck plates that knew the weight of his boots better than any patch of solid ground. Rusty stared at the fuel gauge, his square jaw set like granite. The needle wasn't just in the red. It was trying to dig its way out the other side. He scrubbed a hand over his face, the rasp of his beard a rough, familiar sound in the suffocating quiet. 3 days. 3 days of running on little more than residual fumes and a prayer he didn't believe in. They were a ghost ship, coasting on momentum through a sector known for swallowing vessels whole. My calculations indicate a 97.4% probability that the appropriate human phrase for this situation is, "We're screwed," a dry, synthesized female voice announced from the ship's speakers. The tone was perfectly modulated to convey maximum condescension. You may, of course, insert your preferred vulgar adjective. You seem to have a particular fondness for the one pertaining to fornication. Rusty grunted, his gaze fixed on the viewport. Got a better idea, Betsy? I presented my better idea 3 parsecs ago, the AI retorted, her voice a symphony of digital sarcasm. It involved not entering the Cygnus Rift, a sector clearly labeled on every chart as pirate-infested navigational hellscape. But you, in your infinite, testosterone-fueled wisdom, insisted on taking the scenic route to avoid a minor Cygnus Corp patrol. That minor patrol would have impounded my cargo and put me in a holding cell for a decade. He shot back, his voice a low baritone. He leaned forward, his knuckles white where he gripped the worn yoke of the controls. Through the transparisteel, a desolate moon grew steadily larger, a pockmarked orb of gray stone against the oppressive velvet of space. Praxis 9, their last, desperate gamble. Just get us on the ground in one piece. I shall endeavor to preserve your magnificent organically flawed hide, Betsy said, though why I cannot fathom. The maintenance I will require after this atmospheric entry will be astronomical. This is, of course, assuming this desolate rock even has fuel, and that its isolationist inhabitants are in a charitable mood. One crisis at a time, Rusty muttered. The muscles in his thick shoulders and back bunched as he fought the ship into the moon's tenuous atmosphere. The Betsy screamed in protest, shuddering and groaning like an old man forced into a sprint. The air in the cockpit grew thick with the scent of ozone and overheated metal, a perfume he knew all too well. A familiar cold knot tightened in his gut. In moments like this, when his life hung on a razor's edge, the silence became an enemy, a void that threatened to pull him into the past. He reached out a calloused hand and flipped a worn switch on the console. The raw, mournful wail of an electric guitar sliced through the tension, an old earth blues track, the voice of a long-dead man singing about a lost love and cheap whiskey. It was a sound full of sorrow and bourbon-soaked regret, a sound that understood him. It was his armor against the quiet, his shield against the ghosts. The landing was a barely controlled crash. The Betsy hit the black tarmac hard, her landing gear groaning under the impact, and skidded for half a kilometer in a shower of brilliant orange sparks before shuddering to a violent halt. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the final, lingering note of the guitar hanging in the air like a ghost. Rusty was on his feet before the dust settled, his hand instinctively dropping to the worn leather grip of the heavy blaster holstered against his thigh. He moved through the familiar confines of his ship, with the silent economic grace of a seasoned hunter, his tactical boots making no sound on the grated metal floors. The main ramp hissed open with a sigh of weary hydraulics, flooding the cargo bay with the pale, sterile light of Praxis 9. He paused at the edge of the ramp, letting his eyes adjust. The air was thin, cold, and sterile, smelling of processed minerals and the metallic tang of nothingness. The landing field was immense, a marvel of stark, brutalist engineering that stretched to a horizon dominated by a single monolithic black tower. It was a place built for efficiency, not comfort. and waiting for him, arranged in a perfect silent formation, were a dozen figures. They were clad head to toe in sleek obsidian armor that seemed to drink the light, their faces hidden behind impassive T-shaped visors. Each one held a long, sophisticated-looking pulse rifle, with a disciplined stillness that was far more intimidating than any overt threat. "Well, this is a warm welcome," Betsy's voice murmured in his private comm bead. "I'm detecting advanced energy signatures from their weaponry. I suggest you refrain from making any sudden movements or telling any of your famously terrible jokes." Rusty descended the ramp, his long, duster-style leather coat sweeping behind him like the wings of some grim, flightless bird. He kept his hands open, palms forward, held away from his body. It was a gesture understood in 100 systems on 1,000 worlds. He was a big man, tall and broad-shouldered, packed with the kind of dense, hard muscle that comes not from a gym, but from a lifetime of hard labor and harder fights. His face, all sharp angles and a square jaw, was a mask of calm neutrality, but his eyes, the color of a stormy sea, missed nothing. They scanned the guards, the layout of the field, the path to the tower, always assessing, always ready. The lead guard, distinguished by a subtle silver crest etched into his helmet, took a single, precise step forward. "State your purpose on Praxis 9. His voice was a filtered, metallic monotone, devoid of any emotion. "Refueling." Rusty's voice was a low rumble that seemed to absorb the thin air around it. "My ship is running on empty. I have credits. Platinum grade. I can pay well." The guard's helmet tilted a fraction of an inch, the only sign of his reaction. "Fuel is not for sale here, off-worlder." The cold knot in Rusty's stomach tightened into a knot of pure dread. This was worse than pirates. Pirates you could fight or buy off. This was something else. "Then how do you get it?" "It is a gift," the guard stated flatly, "bestowed by the Regent upon those she finds worthy. Power." This was all about power, a game he was being forced to play, and he didn't even know the rules. He drew a slow breath, forcing the frustration down. "Then I need to speak with your Regent, to make my case." There was no visible signal, no exchanged word, but the guards moved with the chilling synchronicity of a hive mind, flowing around him to form a loose, inescapable circle. It wasn't aggressive, but it was absolute. "The Regent will see you," the lead guard said. "You will come with us, unarmed." Rusty's fingers twitched, a phantom itch for the familiar weight of his blaster. That gun had been his companion through firefights in asteroid belts and tense standoffs in backwater cantinas. It was a part of him. Giving it up felt like surrendering a piece of his own soul. But a dozen pulse rifles at this range wasn't a fight. It was an execution. With a slow, deliberate movement, he unbuckled the gun belt and held it out. "My ship is controlled by a fully sentient AI," he said, his voice hard as tempered steel. "If I'm not back within 3 hours, her standing orders are to vent the reactor core." It was a complete bluff. Betsy would sooner eject him into a sun, but it was the only card he had to play. The guard took the heavy weapon without comment. "Your machine will be unharmed, provided it remains quiescent." They marched him across the vast black tarmac and into the base of the monolithic tower that clawed at the low, gray sky. The interior was even more soulless than the exterior. Polished black floors reflected their distorted forms. The walls were slabs of cold, unadorned durasteel. The only sound was the rhythmic, echoing clang of the guards' armored boots on the floor, a sound that hammered home his isolation. This wasn't a home. It was a tomb, a fortress built against the universe. He was guided into a vast chamber, a throne room that felt more like a tribunal hall or an ancient temple of sacrifice. The air was frigid, carrying a stillness that was heavy with unspoken authority. High above, a single immense circular window served as the only decoration, a perfect portal looking out onto the star-dusted blackness of space, a constant reminder of their magnificent isolation. At the far end of the chamber, on a raised dais of 3 black steps, sat a single figure on a throne carved from what appeared to be a single, massive piece of obsidian, Regent Kiana. As he was brought closer, the details of her came into focus, and Rusty felt a jolt, a primal recognition of beauty and danger intertwined. She was alien, yet her form was undeniably powerfully female. Her skin was the color of pale, luminous jade, so smooth it looked like polished stone brought to life. A cascade of silky, jet-black hair was held back from her face by simple silver clasps, falling down her back. Her face was a study in severe elegance, High, sharp cheekbones, a strong jawline, and full lips that were currently set in a neutral line. But it was her eyes that held him captive. They were the color of molten gold, and they watched his approach with an unnerving predatory intelligence. She was not a queen in a fairy tale. She was a panther on a throne. Rusty was halted a respectful 10 meters from the dais. The guards fanned out behind him, a silent, menacing wall. He stood alone before her, feeling the full weight of her gaze. It was a physical pressure, a look that seemed to peel back the layers of his identity, the grit, the weariness, the carefully constructed walls around his heart. The Wanderer, she finally spoke. Her voice was a low, melodic contralto, smooth as aged velvet, but with an undeniable edge of tempered steel. It filled the cavernous hall effortlessly. You brave the Cygnus Rift, limp to my doorstep on your last breath and demand my resources. You are either a man of great courage or a fool of staggering proportions. I'm a man who's out of options, Regent, Rusty said, keeping his voice steady and respectful. There's a difference. She studied him for a long moment, her golden eyes traveling the length of him, from the scuffed toes of his worn leather boots, up the powerful frame hardened by years of strife, to the weary lines etched around his stormy eyes. Humans are a novelty in this sector. The few who pass through are corporate drones with soft hands or pirate scum with empty souls. You are an anachronism, a relic from a forgotten age, just a freighter captain trying to make a living. The lie tasted like ash in his mouth. A small, knowing smile touched her lips, but it did not reach her eyes. No, you are no mere captain. I see the way you carry yourself, the coiled tension in your shoulders. You stood your ground before my guards, yet you did not seek to provoke them. There is a warrior buried deep inside you, a lonely one. She leaned forward, a subtle shift in posture that made her seem to loom over him. Praxis 9 prospers because we are selective. We do not trade. We do not barter. Everything of value here is earned. Loyalty, respect, and fuel. How do I earn it? Rusty asked, the words feeling like a trap closing around him. Regent Kiana rose from her throne in a single, fluid motion, a river of dark indigo silk. She descended the steps of the dais with a liquid grace that was utterly mesmerizing. As she drew near, he caught her scent, a faint, exotic fragrance of night-blooming flowers and cold starlight. It was as intoxicating as it was alien. I am surrounded by logic, duty, and flawless obedience, she said, her voice dropping to a more intimate, conspiratorial level. It is efficient. It is also profoundly dull. She began to circle him slowly, like a great cat inspecting a strange new creature that had wandered into its territory. You, human, are not dull. You carry the chaos and fire of your species within you, a history of pain, and a stubborn, antiquated code of honor. I can see it burning behind your eyes, a story I wish to read. She came to a stop directly in front of him, so close he could feel the faint warmth radiating from her body. She tilted her head, her golden eyes probing his. I will refuel your vessel, every last drop. In return, you will remain here, on Praxis 9, as my guest. The word hung in the cold air between them. A guest? He asked, suspicion lacing his tone. My champion, she clarified, her voice a seductive purr. My diversion, my toy. The last word was spoken with a soft, deliberate precision that sent an involuntary shiver down his spine. You will entertain me. You will prove the worth of your kind in my arena. You will match your human intuition against the cold logic of my strategists. You will show me the fire that makes a man like you wander the empty places between the stars. And when I am satisfied, when I have grown bored of you, you will be free to leave, with a full fuel tank and a memory few have ever lived to tell. It was a gilded cage, slavery, dressed up in a silken robe. Every instinct, every fiber of his being, the proud, solitary core of who he was, screamed at him to refuse, to spit in her face, to die on his feet rather than live on his knees. But then an image flashed in his mind. The Betsy, his only home, cold and dead on the tarmac. And deeper than that, the memory of a promise broken, a debt unpaid, a ghost that haunted his every waking moment and drove him ever onward. To fulfill that promise, to find his redemption, he needed to fly. And to fly, he needed her fuel. His choice was no choice at all. He met her unwavering golden gaze. A silent battle of wills fought in the space of a single heartbeat. He saw his freedom measured against his duty, his pride against his purpose. Finally, with the weight of his past pressing down on him, he gave a slow, deliberate nod. I accept your terms, Regent. For the first time, a genuine, triumphant smile bloomed on Kiana's face. It transformed her severe beauty into something utterly, breathtakingly radiant. Excellent, she purred, the sound echoing in the vast, silent hall. Let the games begin. The arena was a circle of sand the color of bleached bone, surrounded by rising tiers of black obsidian that drank the artificial daylight. There was no crowd, no roaring mob hungry for blood. There was only Regent Kiana, seated alone in a high-backed chair on a private balcony, a solitary spectator in her personal coliseum. Opposite Rusty, standing with the stillness of a statue, was Gideon. The champion was immense, a full head taller than Rusty and twice as broad. His jade-colored skin was a road map of faded battle scars, and his bare torso was a wall of disciplined, formidable muscle. He held a kylith, a double-bladed energy glaive that hummed with contained power. Rusty had been given a simple weapon, a heavy, unpowered metal staff. The message was clear. This was not a duel of equals. It was a test, a performance. He appears to be genetically engineered for the singular purpose of turning beings like you into a fine paste, Betsy's voice noted dryly in his comm bead. Rusty had managed to keep the tiny subdermal device active. My advice would be to lie down and play dead. It might confuse him. Noted, Rusty murmured under his breath, shifting his weight. He rolled the heavy staff in his hands, feeling its balance. It was solid, brutal, and honest. No tricks. He preferred it that way. Gideon gave a formal, shallow bow from the waist. It was a gesture of martial respect, not deference. Rusty returned it, his eyes never leaving the champions. The air crackled with a silent tension. From her perch, Kiana gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. The duel began. Gideon didn't charge. He advanced with a slow, deliberate pace, the twin blades of his kylith weaving a mesmerizing, deadly pattern in the air. He was a master of his craft, his movements a perfect blend of economy and lethal intent. Rusty stood his ground, staff held in a defensive two-handed grip, his body loose, ready. He wasn't a duelist, not in this formal sense. His fighting style had been forged in the desperate brawls of lawless spaceports and the bloody chaos of boarding actions. It was dirty, opportunistic, and built for survival. The champion lunged, a movement so fast it was a blur. The energy blades hissed, cutting through the air where Rusty's head had been a microsecond before. Rusty pivoted, using the momentum of his dodge to swing the heavy end of his staff in a low arc, aiming for Gideon's knee. The champion was just as fast in defense, bringing the haft of his own weapon down to block with a resounding clang that vibrated up Rusty's arms. The fight became a dance. Gideon was the aggressor, a relentless storm of flashing energy and precise footwork. Rusty was the rock, weathering the blows, giving ground when he had to, his staff a blur of blocks and parries. He took the impacts on the solid metal, letting the force travel through his arms and into his rooted stance. He could feel the jarring shocks in his bones, his muscles already beginning to burn with the strain. He was bigger, stronger than most humans, but Gideon's power was on another level. Brute force was a losing game. Analysis of his movements suggests a weakness in his lateral recovery time, Betsy commented, her tone as calm as if she were reading a grocery list. A flaw of 0.8 seconds following a full lunge. You are, of course, far too slow to exploit it. Thanks for the vote of confidence, Rusty thought, gritting his teeth as he deflected another vicious slash. He was beginning to understand. This wasn't just about winning. Kiana wasn't testing his ability to kill. She was testing his character, his intelligence, his will. He let Gideon press the attack, forcing him into a pattern. Lunge, slash, withdraw. Lunge, slash, withdraw. Rusty gave ground each time, drawing him further from the center of the arena, his breath coming in ragged bursts, sweat stinging his eyes. He made his defense look desperate, his blocks a little sloppier each time. He was putting on a show, playing the part of the outmatched but stubborn human. Gideon, sensing victory, pressed his advantage. He committed to a powerful, overhead strike, designed to shatter Rusty's staff and his guard in one final decisive blow. The energy blades screamed as they descended. This was the moment. Instead of meeting the blow, Rusty dropped, letting the full force of the swing sail over his head. In the same motion, he swept his leg out, hooking it behind Gideon's ankle, the 0.8 second window. The champion, overextended and unbalanced, stumbled. It was just enough. Rusty exploded upward, not with his weapon, but with his body. He drove his shoulder hard into Gideon's chest, a brutal, unexpected tackle. The champion, for all his size, was not prepared for the sheer, focused mass of the human crashing into him. He staggered backward, his eyes wide with surprise behind his warrior's focus. The keyleth was still in his hand, but its angle was wrong. Rusty didn't go for a killing blow. He used the butt end of his staff to strike the champion's wrist with a sharp, precise jab. Gideon grunted in pain, his fingers spasming open. The energy glaive deactivated with a soft fizz and clattered onto the sand. Before the champion could recover, Rusty had the heavy end of his staff pressed firmly against his throat. Silence. The two warriors stood frozen, chests heaving, their breath misting in the cool air. Gideon's dark eyes stared into Rusty's, a mixture of shock and, surprisingly, respect. Rusty hadn't won by being stronger or faster. He'd won by being smarter. He had used his opponent's strength and his own perceived weakness against him. He held the position for a long second, his gaze flickering up to the balcony. He needed Kiana to see this. He was the victor. Then, he slowly lowered the staff and offered a hand to his defeated opponent. Gideon stared at the offered hand for a moment, then accepted it, allowing Rusty to help him to his feet. "You fight with the cunning of a scrab lizard," the champion rumbled, his voice a deep bass. "And the honor of a warrior." Rusty just nodded, his throat too dry for words. He retrieved the keyleth and handed it back to Gideon, hilt first. This act, more than the victory itself, seemed to cement the champion's respect. From the balcony, Regent Kiana rose and began to applaud. The sound was soft, almost delicate in the vast emptiness of the arena, yet it echoed with the weight of absolute judgment. Later that cycle, Rusty found himself in a different kind of arena. He sat across a holographic gaming table from Kiana in her private strategy room. The air here was scented with that same exotic floral fragrance, and the silence was cerebral, not physical. The game was called Cathar, a contest of galactic conquest that made Terran chess look like a child's puzzle. Kiana was a master. Her moves were models of cold, crystalline logic. She built her fleets, fortified her systems, and expanded her empire with a ruthless efficiency that was terrifying to behold. She played like she ruled. Rusty, on the other hand, played like a pirate. He used intuition. He made illogical, unpredictable moves. He sacrificed valuable pieces for strategic positions that wouldn't pay off for 10 moves. He bluffed, setting up phantom fleets and feigning weakness in one sector only to launch a suicidal, lightning-fast raid in another. "You play like a madman," she commented. Her golden eyes narrowed in concentration as she studied the chaotic battlefield on the holographic display. "There is no logic to your strategy. You abandon established doctrines. It is vexing." "War isn't about logic, Regent," Rusty said, leaning back in his chair. "It's about people. And people are messy. They get scared. They get brave. They do stupid things." He moved a single, insignificant scout ship into one of her heavily fortified trade routes. A suicide run. Kiana arched a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "A meaningless sacrifice." "Is it?" Rusty countered. "Or is it a distraction? A way to make you pull your capital ship 1 parsec out of position to deal with an annoyance, leaving your command center vulnerable to my hidden corvette?" Her eyes widened almost imperceptibly as she saw the trap he had laid. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it worked. Her flawless logical formation had been compromised by a single, chaotic, human variable. She studied him across the board, her gaze intense. It was no longer the look of a ruler examining a subject, but of a woman looking at a man. "You are a fascinating contradiction, Rusty Vance. You have the soul of a poet, the mind of a strategist, and the fists of a brute. Just a man trying to survive, ma'am." "Survival is a base instinct," she countered, her voice dropping to that low, intimate purr. "You strive for more than that. I see it. There is a hole in you, a wound that you are trying to outrun by flying to the darkest corners of the galaxy." The observation hit too close to home. The ghost of his broken promise stirred in the back of his mind, a cold shadow he could never fully escape. He broke eye contact, looking down at the game board. Everyone's running from something, perhaps. A smile played on her lips as she made her next move, a brilliant counterattack he hadn't seen coming. But few make it so entertaining. She won the game, of course. Her superior logic eventually overwhelmed his chaotic tactics, but he had left his mark. He had challenged her, surprised her, and forced her to adapt. He had earned another measure of her respect. As he was escorted back to the luxurious quarters assigned to him, a gilded cage if ever there was one, Betsy's voice crackled in his ear. "I've been monitoring your biosigns," the AI said, her tone smug. Elevated heart rate, pupil dilation, increased adrenaline, all classic indicators of arousal. "You're enjoying this, aren't you? Being the Regent's pet." "Shut up, Betsy," Rusty growled, the words lacking their usual bite. "Don't get too comfortable," she warned. "Remember why we're here. Fuel. Freedom. That's the mission. This powerful, beautiful, terrifyingly intelligent alien Regent is just a means to an end. Don't let her become the destination." But as he lay on the impossibly soft bed, staring up at the unfamiliar ceiling, Rusty found that warning harder and harder to heed. Quiana was more than just his captor. She was intelligent, powerful, and she saw him in a way no one had in a very long time. Not as a tool or a threat, but as a man. He was caught in her gravity, and for the first time in years, the endless, lonely darkness of space didn't seem quite so appealing. The bars of his cage were starting to feel like an embrace. "I want to hear from you, veterans. If you were in Rusty's shoes, would you risk it all for a new love, or would you stay focused on the mission? Write it down here in the comments." I read them all. The gilded cage grew more comfortable with each passing cycle. The title of toy had evolved. He was no longer a prisoner on display, but a privileged consort, a fixture in the Regent's private world. The stoic obsidian armored guards no longer treated him with suspicion, but with a quiet, martial respect. They had seen him fight. They had seen him earn his place. Quiana began summoning him not for games or duels, but for companionship. He was brought to her private chambers, a world away from the Spartan austerity of the rest of the tower. This was her sanctuary. The floors were covered with soft, deep pile rugs woven from some iridescent fiber. The air was warm, humid, and alive with the scent of the alien flora that grew in lush abundance in hydroponic alcoves. Water trickled from a small, artfully crafted stone waterfall in one corner, a soothing sound that felt impossibly luxurious on this barren moon. It was a room that showed a side of her he hadn't seen, a capacity for softness, for beauty, for peace. Tonight, she was not in her formal robes of command. She wore a simple, flowing gown of deep emerald silk that clung to her powerful feminine form and complemented her jade skin. Her long black hair was unbound, cascading over her shoulders. She looked less like a regent and more like a woman, a dangerously beautiful one. She gestured for him to sit on a low, comfortable divan opposite her. Between them was a small table holding a crystal decanter, filled with an amber liquid and two delicate, multifaceted glasses. "A gift," she said, her voice softer than he had ever heard it. "From a trader who passed through this system a decade ago. It is called Celastrum, a spirit distilled from the sun-drenched fruits of a world I have never seen." She poured the liquid into the two glasses. It shimmered, catching the soft light of the room. She handed one to Rusty, her fingers brushing his for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. The touch was electric, a jolt of warmth that spread up his arm. He took a sip. The spirit was potent, tasting of fire and spice and a deep, lingering sweetness, like sun-warmed honey and forgotten memories. It burned a pleasant trail down his throat and settled warmly in his chest. "It's good," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Very good." "I have been saving it," she replied, her golden eyes fixed on him over the rim of her glass. "For a worthy occasion, or worthy company." They sat in a comfortable silence for a time, the only sounds the gentle trickle of the waterfall and the soft clink of glass against the table. The barriers between them, regent and prisoner, alien and human, seemed to be dissolving in the warm, quiet air of the room. "Tell me about Earth," she said suddenly, her gaze curious. "I have read the data files. A world of chaos, beauty, and self-destruction. A world that creates men like you." Rusty swirled the amber liquid in his glass, watching the light play within it. "It's complicated. You can find more beauty in one sunrise over an ocean than you'll see in 100 star systems. And you can find more cruelty in one city block than in the coldest vacuum of space. It's everything at once. That's its blessing and its curse. And you left it behind," she stated, not as a question, but as a fact. "Why? A man does not wander the void without a reason. You are not an explorer. You are an exile. What are you running from, Rusty Vance?" Her insight was a sharp, physical thing, like a surgeon's blade probing for a wound. He looked away from her intense gaze, his eyes tracing the patterns in the rug. The ghost was there, in the quiet corners of the room, whispering its old, familiar accusations, the memory of a face, of a promise made, and a promise shattered. "I made a promise to someone," he said, the words tasting of rust and regret. "I broke it. The consequences, they were severe. Not for me, for them. I carry that. It's the fuel that burns hotter than any ion engine." He didn't need to say more. She saw it in the sudden tension in his broad shoulders, in the shadow that passed over his rugged features. Kiana reached across the table and with a surprising gentleness, placed her hand over his. Her skin was cool, smooth as polished stone. "A burden of honor," she whispered. "It is a concept my people have almost forgotten. We are ruled by logic, by the greater good. The individual's honor is a secondary concern, an inefficiency, yet I see the strength it gives you, and the pain." He looked up, meeting her eyes. In their golden depths, he saw not pity, but a profound understanding, a shared loneliness. She was a ruler, surrounded by subjects but utterly alone on her throne. He was a wanderer, touching countless worlds but belonging to none, two solitary souls, orbiting each other in a sterile tower on a barren moon. The space between them seemed to shrink, the air growing thick with an unspoken energy. He could feel the warmth of her hand, see the subtle parting of her lips, the slight quickening of her breath. It was a pull stronger than a planet's gravity, a magnetic force that had been building since the moment he first walked into her throne room. He didn't know who moved first. It didn't matter. He leaned forward and she met him halfway. The first touch of their lips was tentative, a question asked and answered in the same breath. Her lips were soft, cool, and tasted of the fiery, sweet solastrum. The kiss deepened, becoming a desperate, hungry thing. It was a release of all the tension, the loneliness, the unspoken attraction that had simmered between them for weeks. His hand came up to cup her jaw, his thumb stroking the smooth jade skin of her cheek. She made a soft sound in the back of her throat, a murmur of surrender and desire, and her fingers tightened their grip on his hand. He pulled her closer, his other arm wrapping around her waist, lifting her from her seat and onto his lap. She was all graceful curves and surprising strength, melting against his hard, muscular frame as if she were made for it. The kiss broke and they rested their foreheads together, breathing the same air. Her golden eyes were dark with emotion, a swirling galaxy of feelings he couldn't begin to name. "Stay with me tonight," she whispered, her voice husky. It was not a command. It was a plea. He didn't need to answer with words. He lifted her into his arms, her silken gown rustling, and carried her towards the sleeping alcove, a space shrouded in shadow and sheer diaphanous fabrics. For a few precious hours in the warm, scented darkness of her chambers, Rusty Vance allowed himself to forget. He was no longer a wanderer, no longer a man haunted by his past. He was just a man, holding a woman. Their bodies spoke a universal language, a raw and honest communication that transcended species and stars. Her passion was a mirror to his own, a fierce, desperate clinging to a moment of genuine connection in a life defined by solitude. He lost himself in the scent of her skin, the feel of her unbound hair, the sound of her breath mingling with his. He drifted to sleep with her curled against his side, her head resting on his chest, a weight that felt not like a burden, but an anchor. For the first time in a decade, he didn't dream of his broken promise. He dreamed of nothing at all. He awoke to the soft, gray pre-dawn light filtering into the room. Kiana was still asleep, her face serene and unguarded in a way he had never seen it. She looked younger, more vulnerable. A profound, aching tenderness filled his chest, an emotion so foreign he almost didn't recognize it. He gently extricated himself from her embrace, his muscles protesting the movement. He walked to the large window that looked out over the landing field, and there it was. The Betsy, his ship, his freedom, his cage. Docked beside her was a massive tanker vessel, a thick fueling conduit snaking from its belly to the Betsy's intake valve. Two figures in ground crew uniforms were monitoring a console at the base of the connection. They were refueling his ship, fulfilling her end of the bargain. The sight was a splash of icy water. Reality came crashing back in with a brutal, unforgiving force. Last night, for all its passion and genuine emotion, was still part of the transaction. He was her champion, her diversion, her toy. He entertained her, pleased her, and in return he earned his fuel. The tenderness he felt a moment ago was now tainted by the cold, hard logic of their arrangement. He was living in a gilded cage, and last night he had mistaken the bars for an embrace. A beautiful sight, isn't it? Her voice, soft and still laced with sleep, made him turn. She was awake, propped up on one elbow, the emerald silk sheet pooled around her waist. She was watching him, her golden eyes unreadable. "It is," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. He looked from her back to the ship, a home he might find with her, versus the home he had to leave with. "The tanker crew is almost finished," she said, her voice regaining its familiar regal composure. "Your freedom is almost at hand. Is that what you want, Rusty Vance?" The question hung in the air, heavier than any physical weight. He looked at her, this powerful, intelligent, beautiful woman who had offered him a glimpse of a life he thought was lost to him forever. Then he looked at the Betsy, waiting patiently on the tarmac, a silent testament to the promise he still had to keep. The price of his fuel was becoming impossibly high, measured not in credits, but in pieces of his soul, and he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the final payment had yet to be collected. The summons came not as a command from a guard, but as a soft chime from a datapad left on the table in his quarters. "Join me on the observation deck." The request was simple, devoid of her usual regal authority. It felt personal. Rusty pulled on his worn leather coat, the familiar weight a small comfort against the knot of uncertainty tightening in his gut. The Betsy was fully fueled. He had confirmed it himself an hour ago. The transaction was complete. All that remained was the final negotiation. The observation deck was at the apex of the tower, a circular room encased in floor-to-ceiling transparasteel. It offered a breathtaking, 360-degree view of the moon's stark surface and the infinite, star-dusted blackness beyond. Praxis 9 hung in the void like a ship at anchor, a lone bastion of order in the chaotic sea of the Cygnus Rift. Kiana stood with her back to him, her hands clasped behind her, gazing out at the cosmos. She wore the deep indigo robes of her office, a symbol of the authority she was about to wield. The Regent was back. The woman from the night before was a memory, as sweet and fleeting as the celastrum they had shared. "I have often wondered what it must be like," she said, her voice calm and measured, not turning as he approached. "To be out there, to be so small and insignificant, at the mercy of the void. Does it make you feel powerless or does it make you feel free?" "Both," Rusty answered, his voice a low rumble. He stood beside her, his gaze following hers to the distant, shimmering nebulae, sometimes in the same breath. "An answer worthy of a human philosopher," she said with a faint smile, finally turning to face him. Her golden eyes were clear, composed, but he could see a flicker of something deeper in their depths, a shadow of the intimacy they had shared. "Your ship is ready. The terms of our agreement have been met. I am satisfied." "Then I'm free to go," he stated, the words feeling heavier than he expected. Freedom. It was all he had wanted when he'd landed here, broken and desperate. Now, the prospect felt like a sentence. "You are," she confirmed. "But I have a new offer for you, Rusty Vance. One outside the parameters of our original game." She took a step closer, her presence filling the space between them. "Do not go." The words spoken so simply hit him with the force of a physical blow. "Stay," she continued, her voice imbued with a quiet, compelling sincerity. "Stay here, on Praxis 9, not as my champion, not as my toy, as my consort, my partner." She gestured to the star-strewn vista around them. "This moon is a fortress, a sanctuary of order in a galaxy of chaos, but it is a lonely place to rule. Your presence, your illogical, chaotic human presence, has been a disruption I find I am unwilling to part with." It was an offer beyond anything he could have imagined. Power, purpose, a home, an end to the endless, soul-crushing wandering. He could have a life here. He could stand beside this incredible woman, a pillar of strength for her to lean on, a partner to share the burden of command. He could build something, heal. He looked at her, truly looked at her. He saw not just the Regent, but Kiana. He saw the strength in her jaw, the intelligence in her golden eyes, the vulnerability she had shown him in the dead of night. He could love this woman, a part of him, a part he thought had died long ago, already did. The temptation was a physical ache in his chest, a siren song promising a safe harbor after a lifetime at sea. He imagined waking up next to her every morning, the scent of her filling his senses. He imagined standing by her side, their strengths complementing each other, building a future from this rock in the middle of nowhere. And then, the ghost whispered, the face of a woman with eyes the color of a Terran sky, the sound of a child's laughter, the feel of a small hand in his, a promise made in a sun-drenched garden a lifetime ago. I'll be back. I swear it. I'll make it right. A broken promise. The weight of it settled back onto his shoulders. A familiar burden he had carried for so long it had become a part of him. He could not build a new life on the foundations of a ruined one. He could not offer Kiana his future when his past still owned his soul. To accept her offer would be a lie, and she, of all people, deserved better than that. He reached out and gently took her hand. Her skin was cool, and she didn't pull away. Kiana, he said, using her name for the first time. The sound of it felt both intimate and final. In another life, if I were another man, there is nothing I would want more. He saw the understanding dawn in her eyes, followed by a flicker of pain she quickly masked. She was a regent again, impervious. But you are this man, she stated, her voice losing its warmth, retreating back to the safety of command. And you have promises to keep. I do, he said, his voice thick with a regret that was so profound it felt like a physical wound. A man is nothing but his word, his honor. It's all I have left. She squeezed his hand once, a brief final acknowledgement, and then released it. She stepped back, the distance between them becoming a chasm. I see. The relic I saw in the throne room. An anachronism clinging to an old and broken code. I found it fascinating. I did not realize it was also a cage. It is, he admitted softly, but it's mine. Their farewell was not one of anger or tears, but of a deep, somber respect for the unbreachable gulf that lay between their two worlds. They were two stars, destined to pass close enough to feel each other's gravity, but never to fall into a shared orbit. He turned and walked away, the sound of his boots echoing in the silent, star-filled room. He didn't look back. He couldn't. If he saw her face one more time, he knew he wouldn't have the strength to leave. The walk back to the Betsy across the black tarmac was the longest of his life. The thin, cold air felt heavy, suffocating. Each step was a choice, a reaffirmation of his lonely path. He was a free man, but freedom had never felt so much like a loss. He sealed the ramp, the hiss of the hydraulics sounding like a final sigh. The cockpit was just as he had left it, the worn seat molded to his form, the faint smell of old coffee and ozone a familiar welcome. Home. Fuel tanks are at 100% capacity, Betsy's voice chimed, blissfully unaware of the emotional wreckage in the cockpit. All systems nominal. Pre-flight checks complete. Shall I file a departure plan with the Praxian traffic control? No need, Rusty said, his voice hollow. I think they know we're leaving. He strapped himself into the pilot's seat, his hands moving over the controls with practiced familiarity. He powered up the ion engines, and the deep, life-affirming thrum filled the ship once more. The Betsy was alive again. He was alive again. But he felt dead inside. As the ship lifted off the tarmac, rising gracefully into the gray sky, he allowed himself one last look at the tower. He imagined her standing there in that room of stars watching him go, a queen on her lonely throne. He angled the ship toward the black, pointing its nose toward the endless, star-dusted road. He was a free man, with a full tank of fuel and a galaxy to lose himself in. He had won. But as he engaged the FTL drive and Praxis 9 vanished from his viewport, he knew he had left something essential behind in that tower. He had traded a chance at a new beginning for the duty to finish an old painful story. It was the price of his honor, the price of his freedom. He flicked the worn switch on his console. The mournful, solitary wail of a blues guitar filled the cockpit, a familiar companion for the lonely journey ahead. The song was about a man who had everything and lost it all, his voice cracking with a sorrow so deep it could carve canyons. Rusty closed his eyes, the music washing over him, and flew on into the lonely, unforgiving black. True freedom is not the absence of chains, but the courage to carry the burdens we choose. Honor, while a heavy price, is sometimes the only thing a man has left to define him in a universe that seeks to erase his identity. The road is long and lonely, but it's better when we travel together. If this story touched you, subscribe and share it with a friend who appreciates the old code of honor.